Hello, welcome back, and welcome to our special edition of Where is the Money? We know we track the money, Hot Chat podcast, Minority Business Connections. My name is Sharon Pender, President and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council and the operator of the U.S. Department of Commerce MBDA Center, Washington, D.C., and the Federal Procurement Center. Welcome to season 1, episode 9. I always wanted to say that like we were a series with Maryland's Comptroller Peter Franchot, our Chief Fiscal Officer. So excited that he is here. You know, he ensures that our tax dollars are spent wisely and has been a champion of improving schools, strengthening our communities. And we're going to talk about today, if you don't know, you should know, his position, drive, and advocacy for minority business. It is our mission as an organization and with this podcast to feature dynamic one-on-one conversations with our MBEs, with CEOs, with CFOs, supply diversity professionals, procurement leaders, and some of the leading companies across this region via our Hot Chat podcast discussions. We spotlight successes, we zero in on challenges, but all the while trying to figure out for our businesses, where is the money? More importantly, what we'd like for you to do is to feel free to share your thoughts on this topic of interest. And you can find us on our website at www.crmsdccares.com. And that's the website that we stood up in relationship to helping our minority businesses through this COVID time, and our social media partners as well. Listen, before we get started, we have to say thank you to our sponsors. They are responsible for allowing us to have this conversation. We'll get into most of our sponsors later, but I wanted to, before we started, to thank Exelon, which is BGE and Pepco Holdings, Exelon companies, Southwest Airlines, the Hilton, Amcus, Capital One, CompuGain, JDC Events, SB and Company, and Shroud Priest. Just some of our top sponsors. But let's stop, all this talking and bring on our special guest for today. And it is the Honorable Peter Franchot. But let me first tell you a little bit about him. His resume is long enough to choke a horse, so we can't just talk about his resume, but I'm gonna give you some highlights. He has served as Maryland's 33rd comptroller since 2007. First elected to his current position, he has been re-elected 3 times. Most recently in 2018, during which he received 1.6 million votes. Did you know that's the highest number of votes cast for any candidate for state government office in Maryland's history? You have to sit back and chew on that for just a moment. My goodness. As the Chief Fiscal Officer, Comptroller Franchot, is a tireless champion for working families and small businesses and a stalwart advocate for fiscal policies that strengthen our state economy. He, as a chief executive of a 1,100-person state agency, he's focused on delivering respectful, responsive, and results-oriented taxpayer service. Now, that is paramount. When you think of government, I've served in government, to be responsive and respectful. I think that's just awesome. And under his leadership, he's considered one of the most effective and efficient comptrollers in the nation. And so he has a robust background, but we're going to get into some of that. But, I just want to bring you on and just say thank you. And thank you for taking the time. Our audience should understand what happens in the comptroller's office, but more importantly, I really, have respected the work you've done on behalf of minority businesses. Just want to share that information with our audience, but I just want to say welcome and thank you. You're on mute, Comptroller.
Good, there I am. So, Sharon, I just want to return the compliment because your life's work, your legacy, your passion for getting rid of the economic discrimination which we have built into our economy on behalf of women and minority-owned businesses. Personally, I'm just very grateful to you because frankly, you've changed the entire temperature here in Maryland. I'm delighted to talk to your group, your audience, but I understand there's some people in other states. So anybody can contact me who wishes to. My personal cell phone number is 301-332-1961. We are making big advances in Maryland, but we can always learn from other states, and we can also help other states if there's an interest. So thank you for having me on the show.
You know what? I don't know too many public servants that give out their personal phone number. I'm just impressed out of my mind. But you know what? I before we get into some of the items, what I like our audience to know, because I'm always curious about someone who dedicates their life to public service. I know before you were elected to this office, you were also a state delegate. But can you tell us at the end of the day, what made you, because sometimes it can be a thankless job, what made you plunge into this abyss called public service, and what keeps you there? What has been the draw for you?
I hate to be kind of glib, but my mother, God bless her, up in heaven now, she had a marvelous smile. And I got her smile from her. I
Okay.
also learned how to coordinate that with shaking somebody's hand, my
Mm.
smile with a shaking hand. That's basically all the entry criteria there are to being an elected official.
Uh-huh.
And I have a tremendous staff that's helped me, obviously, over the years. But it's the work of a lifetime. I started in the United States Army. I was a grassroots organizer for many years. I was a congressional staff director for then Congressman Ed Markey, now U.S. Senator Ed Markey. You're right, I served 20 years in the legislature, and now I've served, at the end of this term, 16 years as comptroller. All of it centered around helping people. And as you mentioned, the 3 R's, we call them in our agency: respect the taxpayer, respond to the taxpayer, get results for the taxpayer. There's no such thing as a Democratic or a Republican tax return in our agency. And, we pride ourselves on the fact that I'm a tax collector who generally it's not the most popular subject, but I have made a connection with the Maryland public. And I think, I'm blessed to be able to be the comptroller. So thank you for having me on. And it's not just comptrollers around the rest of the country, because a lot of states don't have elected comptrollers.
Mm.
It's also just budget secretaries and others who are involved in the kinds of issues that you and I are right now.
Okay. And then we're also unique in a sense with the Board of Public Works. You are a major contributor of one of the three. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that for those who don't know?
Yeah, that is a little known 3-member panel in Maryland that no other state has. It's called the Board of Public Works. We meet every 2 weeks. On average, we approve $440 million in state contracts at each meeting. The governor's independently elected. He's a Republican, Larry Hogan. I'm independently elected statewide. I'm a Democrat. The third member is the treasurer, who's elected by the legislature, which is heavily Democratic. So that tends to be a Democratic seat also. But every contract over $200,000 needs to get 2 votes out of the 3 people. What is unique about our panel compared to other state or municipal boards of estimates and things like that, this is an independent panel. We're not appointed by the governor. And so you actually need to make sure you've got 2 votes when you go in. Last meeting, the deputy treasurer who was there for the treasurer and myself voted, and the governor voted the other way. That doesn't happen that often because these things are decided in offline a little bit. But it's a unique panel. I recommend it to every state because what you end up with is checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
And you have legitimate questions. And because most politicians like me hate bad news, governor hates bad news. So you don't want to talk publicly about some contract that's perhaps inadequate. So there's a general around the country, there's a lack of accountability and transparency in these state procurements. And all I'm suggesting is that we should use the 2-party system to make sure that we maintain transparency.
You know what? And public policy dictates the behavior in the marketplace. And so what I think our audience really should understand is that in your role on the Board of Public Works, for example, you have shut down, influenced, advocated for um, whatever goals may have been set on a project. You have questioned oftentimes minority business participation. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, no, the folks that are in the procurement field know exactly what I'm talking about. They're big improvements that we need to make. I will tell you just in reference, because I kind of enjoy the example. When I was first elected comptroller 14 years ago, I
Hmm.
became vice chairman of the board of trustees of the state retirement system. This is a $65 billion fund for our public employees' retirements. Well, the first meeting I said, by the way, we're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to money managers, private money managers
Remember
around the
that.
country to invest our money because we need that rate of return in order to stay solvent. How many of them look just like me? And the answer was, well, we have 52 money managers and they're all white males.
Hmm.
And I said, well, that's got to change. And they said, well, we have a fiduciary responsibility. You don't understand, you newly elected comptroller. We can't do that. I said, oh, yes, you can.
Hmm.
Flash forward, we now invest 20% of the 65 billion with minority and women money managers. And that's obviously hundreds of millions of dollars in fees that go to them, but that's not the point. They traditionally, year after year, outperform the old incumbent white male money managers. And what we did was we brought in fresh talent and new energy. And I love the fact that they outperform the so-called fiduciary incumbents, the veterans,
Right,
who
right.
for
Oh,
years we gave money to without any questioning whatsoever, assuming that they were better. No, they weren't better. And now the whole state benefits from a fund that's more robust. But we're talking $12 billion being invested by women and minority money managers. God bless America. And so I give that just as a small example of what you're trying to do overall as far as the economy and your peers around the country. There's a significant amount of progress we have to make because we're dealing with the banks having years ago redlined our brown and black communities.
mhm.
Literally, they would take out a map when a red thing and just draw it around and say, nobody's going to get him. We're not going to assure mortgages. We're not going to do anything in these communities. And it affected not just the families and the citizens, Sharon, as you know, it affected Black and women-owned businesses.
Absolutely.
They were denied capital. So we're changing that. It's not easy. And on the procurement end, we have aspirational goals of a certain amount of MBE participation in state contracts, but we still have these boxes that need to be checked. And, it's crazy. It's stuff that's been invented by the incumbents to keep the new companies out. So we have things like surety bonds and capacity levels and things that get in the way of bringing in and opening up our procurement system. So we end up with a lot of single bids. We end up with what I call the vendor protection program, which is, gee, we tried to get a competitive bid, but there just weren't any. Well, there weren't any because the word's out, it's not competitive. So we're changing that, but it requires, since the goals are aspirational and not mandatory,
Sure.
and the waivers are available and often utilized by the agencies, and the mentality is still there where they draw a big red circle around sectors in state contracts and say, no, we're not going to open that up.
Mhm.
So it's a process where, with the legislature and with the right leadership, you're able to implement change. And as I said, every 2 weeks we get 50 or 60 contracts that we have to approve. And Maryland is a leader. I'm not suggesting we aren't, but all the MBE goals are there, and we try to hold the agency's feet to the fire.
But comptroller, I don't want that point to be lost because it's about leadership, right? And because you are in the position to question, to push back, you have in effect impacted change in the state of Maryland and been a great contributor to as to why Maryland is considered a leader in this country in terms of minority businesses. When you think about, let's just take a segment of minority businesses, Black-owned businesses, it's said that 95% of those businesses have revenues of 5 million or more. And so when you talk about looking at our current way of doing business and being impactful there, where do you think that the future may lie or opportunities may be for minority businesses? You have any thoughts there?
Well, it requires leadership, and I'm very interested in working with the state credit unions and the state credit banks. These are the small local banks, not the big
Mhm.
banks, and empowering them through statutory, regulatory, and financial authority. We're a very wealthy state, so we have a tremendous amount of debt capacity. So I'm looking to have the state partner more closely with those parts of the banking community that can understand exactly what we're dealing with and how to rectify it. It's not just even Black businesses. It's, for example, home ownership. I mean,
Mm,
white ownership of homes is 75% in Maryland. It's 40, less than 45% for African American, and somewhat less for Hispanic, I believe.
mhm.
So that's unacceptable, because if you don't own a home, I'm getting off the business a little bit
No,
here, Sharon, but if you don't own a home,
no.
how can you be part of the middle class if you don't
Right,
own a home and
right.
develop some equity and have some financial security and some generational wealth that you can pass on? We just have to realize that, yeah, there is institutional racism in our economy. It's not just our politics,
Mhm.
and you have to deal with it. And the thing I try to tell everybody who looks just like me, it helps us, because a rising tide in the economy lifts everybody. More economic activity means more wealth for everybody. And so this is a all hands on deck. I am constantly questioning, obviously, these contracts, but more importantly, I'm looking around for a way for the state of Maryland to use its unutilized debt capacity. We've kept our debt very low statewide because we want the AAA bond rating.
Sure.
But we get our AAA bond rating not for having our debt under control. We get it because we have an endless appetite for raising taxes in Maryland, or we used to. Now that's changed a little bit. But the key here is, how do you change the framework so that we can utilize the artificially low debt capacity of the state on behalf of minority and women-owned businesses, but also on minority and women-owned home ownership.
Okay, and you're absolutely right. It's a domino effect in terms of being able to own a home and using oftentimes that as collateral in business startup. Um, when you look at what happened, I mean, you've been comptroller during the most historic times, and your reelection has been historic. But we also just lived through an historic pandemic. Can you talk about the things that you did do in terms of the tax forbearance and things of that nature during the pandemic that helped businesses and families?
Well, yes, but let me just preface it by saying what happened in Maryland, and I think it happened in a lot of states around the country, is that we entered into this situation where, because of the federal relief from both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, the top two-thirds of our economy was able to nimbly adjust to remote working. And with the federal relief, we were able to stabilize not just the many of the businesses, but also the state tax revenues, and also, most importantly, the stock market up in New York. We managed to keep those more or less secure and separate from the bottom one-third of our economy, which is our low-wage earners. Generally, our hospitality sector is those folks. They were financially annihilated by the pandemic, one-third of our state. They continue to be annihilated, and
Mm,
it is a horrible situation for, we call it a K-shaped recovery. The top part of the K is okay. It's the bottom part that right now is unfortunately suffering tremendous amounts of, well, disproportionate threat from the virus, but also disproportionate economic consequences that are negative. So that's kind of our situation. It hasn't changed that much. The bottom third is still in a severe recession, I guess, or depression, similar to the 1930s.
Hmm.
Still have food lines. We still have tremendous suffering going on in our bottom third of our economy. We're working on, we're obviously very grateful that that did not leak into the top 2/3 of the economy. Then we really would have been up the creek. But we still have a situation where tens of thousands of small businesses are permanently closed. And there's a lot of suffering out there right now economically. So I keep urging people to, I was always very conservative about federal spending. I said, oh my God, that's going to raise interest rates and, throw the whole economy into chaos. And they're printing this money in the basement, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I've changed that. I'm now a little more favorable to John Maynard Keynes. Spending money during a real crisis is what saved us. Now we have to move out of that. And I think the situation for women and minority-owned businesses is just beyond belief critical, because they're the ones that have mostly closed.
Hmm.
And they're the ones who live often in congested environments where the COVID virus has a disproportionate negative impact. So a long-winded way of saying, I think we're going to be entering something like the Roaring '20s without the depression that the Roaring '20s led into, but we're going to have a big, robust recovery by the end of the year, assuming Mother Nature cooperates as far as the variants of the virus.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, because, isn't it the possibility? I mean, what we see more and more every day is more and more conversations around this variant, and the fact that there's still a significant portion of folks who are not vaccinated. Do you, if as you look into the crystal ball, do you see, how does Maryland protect itself against what might be inevitable the other way?
Well, my experts tell me most of the concerns I had about inflation and interest rate increase, they're there, but they're kind of being managed because one sector is showing inflation, another sector is showing deflation. So things are kind of balanced out economically. However, if I mentioned Mother Nature, if we have to deal with this situation. I
Hmm.
often say around the state of Maryland when I'm out and about, I make thousands of visits every year to small businesses. I think we've made 10,000 visits in the last 14 years. I often say to people, no, because the social discrimination is a huge issue also with all of the police reform. And I
Hmm.
say to people, wherever they are, whoever they are, whatever party they belong to, no public safety, no economy. People have to feel safe. And I'm also increasingly saying to everybody, no vaccine, no economy,
Mm.
because we just can't have this mindset where people are picking and choosing and saying, oh, well, and this is also, I'm talking about conservative communities that are hoodwinked into thinking that they're magnetized or something if they get vaccinated. But I'm also talking about our African-American community, which has a history of being very skeptical because of the stuff that happened down south, et cetera.
Right.
I
Right.
understand that, but we're in a phase now where no vaccine, possibly no economy, because if one of these variants comes and it's resistant to the vaccine right now, thank God the vaccines have performed miracle work. We could be really in a bad situation. And the mutations in the variants come about because of the lack of vaccines. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and
And I'm not a doctor. I'm the last person to give medical advice to people. I'm just talking economically. We need complete, total vaccination, period, except if a doctor says there's a reason not to. But otherwise, everybody has to be vaccinated, and it is not a matter of constitutional freedom whatsoever. It's called survival.
And that's very important because if indeed we've seen just the decimation of businesses, some minority businesses because of the pandemic, and that was in 2020, and now we're in 2021. If 2022 turns a corner that impacts us that way, then that's really going to impact the minority business community and particularly minority businesses. So that perspective is very, very important. And it's a great message for those in the minority business community that to understand what the economic impact is going to be if we find ourselves in that situation.
And I think from a political standpoint, it's the right thing to do. Our polling shows that Governor Hogan, a Republican, is more popular than Democrats.
Because
I'm not talking the overall statewide. I'm talking we're just polling Democrats.
mm-hmm.
And the favorabilities, despite his flaws, and everybody has flaws and things that I disagree with him on, he gets enormous favorabilities in these political polling for at least seeming to be a rational, functioning adult and not somebody who's just playing politics all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that folks that are on the line that are involved with politicians should just tap folks on the shoulder and say, you really need to do the right thing as opposed to what you think might help you in the election.
Mm-hmm. During the pandemic as well, you did things to help businesses like postpone or
yes, defer. No, we had forbearance, we called
right.
it, and it proved to be a very helpful partner. Thank you for bringing it up again, because I sometimes forget this. But for example, last year, we, along with the feds, we did it first. We deferred. We gave forbearance from April 15th to July 15th. That's a 90-day period. We basically said, you can keep the state taxes that you owe us individually and corporate wise. We're talking maybe $20 billion, $22 billion that I normally collect from individuals and businesses. And sales tax. You can keep all that tax money that you owe us for those transactions for 90 days, interest-free and penalty-free. It's called forbearance. A lot of people said, oh, you shouldn't do that because people will not pay their money at the end on July 15th. No, everybody pocketed the money. I like it because people that didn't need relief sent us the taxes. Folks that did need the relief used it to keep their business alive or, pay their own family's budgets. And then they all ended up paying what they should pay on July 15th. I thought it was a beautiful, elegant relief plan because it's self-selecting. It's easy. You're not like filling out a grant application or something. You're simply keeping your money in your pocket for 90 days as a loan from the state. Mm-hmm. And everybody ended up paying their taxes back. So I did it again this year, but I was the only state in the country.
Wow.
And the feds didn't do it. And so I'm delighted to report that it's been just as successful as it was in 2020. 2021, people we're talking estimated $2 to $3 billion at their disposal for 90 days, interest-free and penalty-free. July 15th is come and gone. People are paying their taxes owed. And I like it because it's so elegant and it can be implemented without embarrassing people or publicizing people or requiring people to hire a lawyer or even call you, Sharon. They are able just to do it. And I get a lot of pats on the back around the state because people say, yeah, that really came in and was useful.
Okay. Anything else up your sleeve?
No, I'm happy to be on your show and looking forward if there are questions from folks or if there are other questions that you have, whatever we can do to improve our economies in our state, our region, and also around the country.
One of the things I'm most proud of during my service with the state is the creation of the Small Business Reserve. I don't know if you know that story.
Yes, I know that. Well, I don't know the story of its genesis, so tell me, please.
Well, was just trying when I was secretary of the Governor's Office of Minority Affairs, and we were reforming the state's program, just trying to figure out what we could do to elevate minority businesses from just subcontracting to being primes. And so I actually came up with the idea of small business reserve because it was a way of doing it and not, it was small business specific, so we wouldn't run into any issues or lawsuits of being narrowly focused. And so small business, because most of a lot of the businesses and a lot of the businesses in Maryland rather are small businesses that came under the threshold. And so it was really coming up with the idea to say that if at that time, seven up of the largest procuring agency would set aside contracts specifically for small businesses to be prime contractors, we could begin the putting in place the ability of our businesses priming. And that was, and then the governor put it in his package, and that's how it came about. And so I know that you continue to do work with the Small Business Reserve Program and other tools that are in place in order to do that. Didn't know if you knew that story.
No, I do know it, and I love the organization and the funding and the whole idea behind it. I
Mhm,
will just, respectfully suggest that you and I have a lot of work to do
mhm.
because it's still out there. And and what I'm referring to is now kind of sanitized redlining. It's still there, and we can talk about it. The surety bonds, for example. I'm sure you guys are aware of the situation there, where yeah, okay, we want some proof that the job's going to be done, but we're not interested in blocking people. We're not interested in putting up a barrier or some kind of impediment. I respect greatly what you did, Sharon. You did absolutely spectacular work, and I don't mean to suggest there's work that you left unfinished. It's just hard because we're dealing with the financial community, and the financial community is very resistant to change sometimes. So they are changing, but
Yeah, yeah.
we
Um,
just need to keep the pressure on, I guess.
That's absolutely, absolutely right. And one of my favorite books is Not in My Neighborhood. So I understand, and you're absolutely right in terms of whether people want to see that those red lines. The red lines are absolutely still there. But I also,
How about doing some green lines? How about instead of red lines, why don't the states start
let's
doing some
green
green
light.
lines where we
You know
say,
what?
hey, we're going to invest money there?
I love that idea. Let's green line it. I love it. I love it. Um, as we the other part too is that we look at what's happening on a national scale in terms of the infrastructure um, um, bills and whatever, however it turns out to be. The assumption is that there's going to be money trickling down to the state level for infrastructure projects, and therein is another opportunity to ensure that minority businesses are at the table. Any thoughts there?
Yes. First of all, Maryland has gotten between 60 and $70 billion in federal relief over the last 16 months. Contrast that with what I collect from Maryland businesses and individuals. It's in the 21, $22 billion level annually. So that's more than 3 times the money that I normally collect. We collected that money. So this is on top of that money. It's coming down. So there's excuse me, a tremendous amount of capital, both operating dollars and capital flowing into the state, and the infrastructure plan that's being talked about will just add to that. So the issue is, for me, primarily on the big infrastructure plans, the transportation and mass transit proposals.
Mm-hmm.
We have what are called project labor agreements. I think these are very important because otherwise we end up hiring out-of-state skilled construction workers that come into Maryland and then leave. We need to help our own people. So I'm a big believer in those. As far as the MBE participation, yes, it's a big pool. And I'm not exactly sure what the feds have put in. Traditionally, that's been a very toxic environment. So recently, the National Congress. So we'll wait and see what they are talking about. But I'm doing a top to bottom review of all federal relief, my agency is, and we're looking at, is it going to the people who really need it, i.e., primarily into businesses and individuals that you represent, Sharon, frankly.
Sure.
Is it going to people that really, really need it? Is there an egregious, unacceptable amount of fraud? We're estimating, put your seatbelts on, but we're estimating in Maryland that up to $2 billion, that's B as in boy, of unemployment claims went right to thieves.
Oh my goodness.
Because, the Department of Labor was not organized to detect fraud. And so, they good intentions. They wanted to get the money out the door. And but unfortunately, out of 13 billion, we're estimating it could be more than 2 billion. So a lot of states are folks that are on the line from other states. Your states have also experienced that. So it's a worthwhile target as long as you realize that the unemployment was desperately needed. The checks were by legitimate recipients was extraordinarily important. But the fraud, it turns out, was unacceptable and egregious. And then the third thing we're looking at is what we call pandemic profiteering, which is private sector companies profiting off of the crisis. And that is a kind of a semi-related issue to the extent many of your members are private sector folks.
And that gets managed out of your office, Comptroller, those kinds of.
Well, I wrote the legislature and said, you guys should set up a panel of fiscal experts with subpoena power to make sure that all of this stuff is on the level, because a lot of it was handed out in so-called emergency procurements, which I'm sure you're familiar with. They come before the board, but only retroactively. The money's already been spent, the contract's been given, there's no competition, there's no transparency or accountability. And I can understand it in the teeth of a big crisis, February, March, and April of last year.
Sure.
There's we still on our agenda next Wednesday, we're going to have emergency contracts still coming up, and it gets misused is what I'm saying.
I understand.
Because it's so easy for the governor to just by fiat pick these companies out, but it needs to stop. And all I'm saying is that there's so much federal money that's come in. We need to make sure that particularly women and minority-owned businesses are not just excluded from this river of cash.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. And we are so grateful that you are in the seat of leadership and you have been an effective leader on behalf of minority and women-owned businesses. Thank you so much, Comptroller Peter Franchot, for all that you do and will continue to do.
Back at you. Thank you. It's been your life's work, and I am deeply grateful to you personally.
Oh, grateful to you. So right back at you, Comptroller. Thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first public servant I've ever encountered that gave out his personal cell phone number and continues to fight the good fight on behalf of minority businesses. We are grateful that he's there. We're grateful to have the advocacy. And so you've heard it here, and we certainly are appreciative. Thank you so much, Comptroller.
Thank you, and best to your listeners. And let's work together. All for one and one for all.
Absolutely.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everyone, that concludes another episode of our HotChat podcast featuring Comptroller Peter Franchot. Again, I'm impressed out of my mind. We're grateful for your time today and look forward to staying connected with you. Now, if you need a great reason to get out of the house and connect with our corporate members and other business owners, mark your calendars to join us outside on a day on the greens at our annual business and golf outing. This year is being held at the beautiful Woodmore Country Club in Mitchellville, Maryland, on Tuesday, September the 21st, and we hope to see you there. Now, we do golf a little bit differently. We pair you up, minority businesses, with our corporate members, and when you come off the green for our special luncheon, we invite you to sit at corporate round tables and have some discussions that you can't have on the golf course. Additionally, we want to stay connected with you. We have future podcasts forthcoming with Senator Ben Cardin and DC Water's President CEO David Gaddis. So stay tuned. You may register for our golf tournament and learn more about our organization by visiting our website at www.crmsdc.org. So thank you for our CARES Act team and Graybo Media for all the hard work behind the scenes to help us deliver another great content. And if we could, I'd like to just kind of share with you what I was talking about in terms of some of our upcoming events and our sponsors. Yes. And if we look at our other sponsor list, along with those title sponsors we said in the beginning, we have AARP, AT&T, BAE Systems, Bank of America, BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport, Dominion Energy, Ellison, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FRS, Horseshoe Casino, a part of Caesars Entertainment, Ideal, Electric, Leidos, Lockheed Martin, M&T Bank, the Marriott, McCormick, Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, Northrop Grumman, Peapod, Sodexo, Truist, United States Postal Service, Washington Gas, Metro, WSSC Water, Wells Fargo, and Zillion Technologies. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube at CRMSDC. Farewell until next time. Thank you.